Hey, San Diego. Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production provided by MaxLex Media at KCBQ with your host, Steve Wire. This podcast is dedicated to keeping you informed and engaged with the latest political events and trending news in the San Diego area. Join us on a weekly exploration as we sit down with prominent community members, political figures, insightful analysts, business leaders, and more. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and enjoy the show. On today's episode of Stay Classy San Diego, we're going to actually be doing something a little bit different. So we're going to have on Congressman Mike Levin, who represents the 49th District in California, which covers a lot of Orange County and San Diego County. However, we're also going to be actually bringing in Dr. Thad Kousser. Thad is a professor of political science at UCSD. He's an acclaimed author, and he is also a media commentator for several different outlets. So, Thad, thanks so much for coming on today. We're waiting for the congressman, who's just going to be a couple of minutes because he's voting right now, so doing congressman things. But I'm really happy to have you on the show again, Thad. I know this is round 2 for us, so I wanted to just first of all, give you a chance to introduce yourself a little more. Tell us a little bit more about your credentials, and also maybe preview some of the topics we'll be going over today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Stephen. So as you said, I'm a professor of political science at UC San Diego, and I also co-direct the Yankelovich Center that uses research practice partnerships to bring rigorous evidence and put it in the hands of policymakers and government leaders across the country. So I'm really excited to be talking with Congressman Levin at a time where we're one day into the Mike Johnson speakership. We've just moved away from this chaotic 2-week time in the House in which he serves, but there's also a lot of chaos and challenge in the world, and with Ukraine, the war ongoing still in Ukraine, with the huge conflicts in the Middle East and potential for expanded conflicts, and also in the United States. We've got the potential for government shutdown in less than a month. So how does this congressman approach all these situations at once?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, on a very somber note, yesterday we had, unfortunately, yet another mass shooting. I think we're around 560 for the year is what BBC reported in America, which is unfathomable. But yesterday, Lewiston, Maine, which is actually coincidentally the hometown of my old college, Bates. Shout out there. But the results were at least 18, possibly up to 22 people dead, many others injured, and the shooter, unfortunately, is still at large. So we're still getting more information about the specifics of that, motives, all the back and forth media narratives that go on with that. But suffice it to say, this is unfortunately just added to the list of a very long list of mass shootings that we're going to be talking about today. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and admit the congressman to the waiting room, and we are going to get this interview going. So let's do it. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to introduce Congressman Levin to our audience.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us, Congressman. How are you?
I'm doing terrific. It's nice to see you both. I'm sorry to be a few minutes
it happens.
Behind there. I'm jumping around, meeting after meeting.
It's all good. I've interviewed you before, actually, when I was working with the Coast News, so it's nice to talk to you again.
I love that. And I love the name of this podcast.
Yeah. That was one of my brothers came up with that idea, but it's worked for us. So I'm going to give a quick introduction because we have a lot to get into and not so much time.
Sure.
So Congressman,
how much time do we have?
I think they said 20, 30 minutes or
20 minutes. All right. Okay. We can fit a huge amount in 20 minutes.
All right, let's do it. So as I said, Mr. Levin represents the 49th District of California. He represents areas in Orange County, San Diego County, which is where we are based today. And how long have you served in Congress? It's been since
2018.
We won our election in 2018, so I was sworn in January of 2019.
Okay, so we're going on almost 6 years now, with elections coming up next year. So glad to have you on the show today. First of all, most pressing topic on, I think, a lot of people's minds has to do with the events that unfolded yesterday, unfortunately, and Lewiston, Maine, which, as I mentioned to our audience before, is actually where I attended undergraduate college. And I just wanted to get your thoughts as far as your reaction to the shooting. I mean, so far we have about 18 to 22 casualties or fatalities, and just sort of what we can do right now, given the political situation as far as gun violence prevention. Given that there's a Republican majority in the House, given that there's obstacles to getting legislation passed, sort of what the next move is for gun violence prevention.
Well, I'm heartbroken, Steve, and it's my friend Jared Golden's district out in Maine, and I can only imagine what the community is going through. I always try to stay hopeful that perhaps it will be finally the tragedy that compels people to act in a meaningful way. And I don't know whether that will be the case here. I can tell you after Sandy Hook and then once again after Uvalde, and there are so many awful tragedies in between Pulse nightclub and Las Vegas and so many others, including even in San Diego. But I always wonder, is that going to be finally what compels action? And what I've recognized is that the public is there. The public wants universal background checks. The public wants even an assault weapons ban. Not the entire public, but a solid plurality wants to see the assault weapons ban, which was in place from 1994 to 2004, back in place. They want to see certain restrictions on high capacity ammunition or on ghost guns. They want to see more robust red flag laws. They certainly want to see safe storage. In fact, that's overwhelming. But then Congress has failed time and again. And we did get the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed last Congress. That was the first major bipartisan, and I say bipartisan in that there was something like 15 or so Republicans and all the Democrats. But that was the first major bipartisan bill we'd had on gun violence prevention in 30 years. And it did pass, and it is the law of the land. But we clearly need to do more. I won't give up the fight. I'm part of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. And what we've tried to do this Congress with the Republicans in charge is a series of what are known as discharge petitions. Discharge petition is a vehicle for the minority party to try to compel floor action by getting a majority of members to sign a petition that discharges legislation to the floor for a vote. And we've tried to do that with a number of bills like the background check bill, like the red flag legislation, closing the Charleston loophole. That obviously the shooting in Charleston was another very, very tragic situation. But we can't get a single Republican to support these discharge petitions. And at the end of the day, I think it is just as much a campaign finance problem as anything else. Because on issues like this, where you have such an overwhelming majority, you take the background check issue. You've got 80 to 90% of the American people want to see background checks. So why can't we get it done? I would argue it's because in the wake of Citizens United and with the campaign finance system as it is, there are hundreds of millions of dollars flowing from the corporate gun lobby and from a lot of other interests to prevent the will of the people from becoming the political will in the Congress.
Sure.
And I don't have easy answers other than campaign finance reform measures such as those that I've embraced since I've been here.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said before, and that I want to get your thoughts on this before we move on, but this issue is so emotionally charged. It's so intensely personal to a lot of people. As I said, it's personal to me because the shooting took place at my my undergrad town, and also I have a brother who's a survivor of a mass shooting. So it's very, very personal, very emotionally charged. And I just want to note that, for those who are sort of waving their hands in the air or just feel like this is like sort of a hopeless situation, do you see there being anytime in the near future the political will for meaningful change, or are we kind of stuck where we're at?
Well, who has the gavels makes all the difference. And the fact of the matter is, the biggest impediment is the filibuster in the Senate. And you have to be able to get around that filibuster. You've got to find a handful of decent Republican members who are willing to stand up to the corporate gun lobby. And it's been really difficult. They were able to get a pretty good bipartisan majority with that Safer Communities bill, but that bill is relatively modest in its scope. And I give Chris Murphy all the credit in the world for negotiating that bill. And as I said, it's the most comprehensive that we've had in 30 years. But for example, if we wanted to do background checks, or we wanted to do any of these others, we need to make sure we find 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 in the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, and then of course do all we can to have the best electoral outcomes that we can as well.
Absolutely. Now, Thad, I want to turn to you and ask you, obviously this is an important topic and I wish we could spend hours on it, but as far as sort of some of the recent developments that have happened in Congress in terms of the issues concerning the speakership, sort of the fight over the speakership, and also the issues related to the looming government shutdown, I sort of want you to take it away in terms of sort of some of the questions you have for the congressman on how that's going to move forward.
Great, thanks. And I think the congressman set this up by talking about who wields the gavel. And so we are now one day into the tenure of Speaker Johnson, and we'll see how long he wields the gavel. But Representative Levin, you outlined a strategy with the discharge petitions, which sort of echoed the strategy that led to the avoidance of a government shutdown about a month ago, which was Democrats allying with a few moderate Republicans to move things forward.
Yep.
That was the deal that Kevin McCarthy struck. That was the deal that cost Kevin McCarthy his speakership, because while Democrats were willing to ally with him and a few other moderate Republicans to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open, Democrats were not willing to ally with a few moderate Republicans to either save Speaker McCarthy or to elect another potentially more moderate speaker. Now that's never been done in Congress before with Democrats with a cross-party coalition, but it happens all the time in states across the country in their state legislatures. What were the conversations that you can share with us, or what was your strategic thinking about, was this ever a live option for Democrats to do? And now that we have a speaker who is both sort of on the conservative side of the Republican caucus and beholden to 8 of its most extreme members, how do you see this working relationship going forward?
Well, the working relationship, probably not great, unfortunately. And look, I hope that we find some areas of common ground with Mike Johnson. I don't know him personally, but I do not like what I have read and heard about him, particularly his role in leading the amicus brief to provide a permission structure for rank and file Republicans to dispute the 2020 election. And also his extreme views on LGBT equality or reproductive rights or the environment or gun violence or basically anything of importance in this day and age. I find myself questioning the Republicans' logic in putting literally the most extreme member on some of these issues. Not the most extreme in rhetoric, not the most extreme in personal style, far from it, probably among the least in that regard. But when you look at what he's said and what he's written over the years about social policy, I mean, he's to the right of Mike Pence on social policy. He's to the right of Paul Ryan on economic policy, on potentially going after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And he espouses Donald Trump's views on elections, specifically the 2020 election. So this is really bad. Now, I guess I would dispute the characterization, Thad, to an extent that we didn't want to work with them, because we really did. What wound up happening, you have to look at it, sort of the chronology, and see how it all unfolded. Kevin McCarthy cast the die for all this happening by allowing a one-person motion to vacate the chair to be part of the rules package for the 118th Congress. It was that a majority of, like when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, a majority of the Democratic caucus had to agree to vacate the chair. And Kevin McCarthy went from, my understanding, I wasn't in these negotiations, but he went from needing 100 members, 50, 25, 10, 5, and then 1. He went all the way from a majority of House Republicans to 1 House Republican is all that would be needed to remove him as Speaker. That in itself was unprecedented. And that eventually led, after both the default crisis, where we came up with the bipartisan solution, over 300 people supported it. And then the continuing resolution to keep the government open 45 days, that too had over 300 people support it. Those two things led to this effort by Matt Gaetz and supported by 7 others to remove McCarthy. Let me take it to the day of the continuing resolution. I know we only have 20 minutes, but it's important you understand the context here. McCarthy tried to jam that CR without anybody on our side having the opportunity to read a word of it. And we had to buy time by trying to have Hakeem Jeffries, Leader Jeffries, our minority leader, speak as long as possible with a magic minute, as it's known. And he spoke brilliantly and articulately and gave a very long speech because we actually hadn't read any of the 72-page bill. That demonstrated bad faith and a lack of trustworthiness. The next thing that happened is that after we had voted for the continuing resolution, Kevin McCarthy went on TV the next day and blamed Democrats for wanting to shut the government down. It was done in such bad faith that any goodwill that we had left for Kevin McCarthy was gone. We couldn't trust him. His own conference increasingly couldn't trust him. And then there was no time really to negotiate because the motion to vacate had already been filed. So that was how it went down there. Next, what happened is we went time after time after time, both publicly and more importantly, privately, in good faith to our colleagues across the aisle. I know very well, maybe like 25 or 30 members on the other side that I have spoken with about a bipartisan path forward. Number one, is there a member in the House Republican Conference who would be willing to serve out the duration of that term, retire, and be a consensus building speaker to allow that common sense majority of roughly 300 people, both Democrats and Republicans, to come together and vote on things? And I was rebuffed at every turn. Sometimes the answer was, we have to hit rock bottom first. Sometimes the answer was, if we did that, then we'd all be voted out. I got any number of answers, but we tried to find common ground. And then when we couldn't find common ground, we said, okay, let's empower Patrick McHenry. Mm-hmm. And we weren't looking for any sort of side deal. We weren't looking for any sort of stipulations or concessions. Just empower Patrick McHenry. And they wouldn't go for that either. And so that's how we wound up going through Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, Tom Emmer, and eventually landing on Jim Jordan with a suit, with a sport coat, Mike Johnson.
Sure.
Well, thanks so much for giving me both that narrative and a sense of your thinking at moving on towards the next looming crisis point. So November 17th.
Yep.
Government is due to shut down. Could be military families without paychecks. National parks will close. All of the things that we hear about. Democrats and the Senate are working closely with Republican leaders in alignment with President Biden. But in the House now, you have a leader who can credibly say, if I don't starve the beast, right? If I don't get major cuts in government spending, I'm out as a leader. No one in my caucus will vote with me. That's a really strong bargaining position really for Speaker Johnson. Where do you see this going? What are your goals and your hopes, and how do you see Congress getting there before so that the Christmas is a happy one?
Well, my crystal ball is broken with regard to House Republicans and what they do. And I won't pretend to tell you what the dynamic will be within the House Republican Conference. What I can say, though, is what Mike Johnson wrote in a Dear Colleague to Republicans the night that he was, earning the support to become Speaker. And he laid out first another additional continuing resolution to either January 15th or April 15th. That's number one. And everything else he wants to do is predicated on that. Now, if we don't have all 12 appropriations bills passed and agreed to by the House and Senate and signed into law by President Biden by the end of the calendar year, by virtue of the debt ceiling deal that we negotiated earlier this year, there will be an automatic 1% cut across the board for defense and non-defense discretionary spending. And Republicans aren't going to want to cut the defense budget by 1%. Democrats aren't going to want to cut non-defense discretionary spending by 1%. So that is hanging over everyone's head. And that hopefully will be some needed motivation for the House and Senate to come together. What I can tell you is that we're going to be here next week and the following week and the week after that. Hopefully they'll let us take Thanksgiving off with our families to pass the rest of the appropriations bills. Now, the Republicans are taking a huge, it's not a scalpel. I mean, they're just decimating non-defense discretionary spending. 20 to 30% cuts across the board for all the programs for the people who need the help the most. And that is directly contradictory to what they agreed to back in May and June, when we set, as part of that bipartisan limit to avoid a bipartisan deal to avoid a default crisis to deal with the debt limit, we set spending caps. And those spending caps were lower than we wanted and higher than some of what they wanted, which means they're probably pretty reasonable. But the ink was barely dry on that bill, and they were already reneging on that deal. So where we are today is, I think, if Johnson is able to adhere to his outline, another CR to either January 15th or April 15th, a mess between now and then, and probably a sprint to avoid a shutdown either in January or April.
Now, in the closing minutes that we have, I did want to ask Congressman, because we're not going to have time to cover some of the other topics, but just on the note of the speakership, and you mentioned that Mike Johnson has sort of unfortunately been spearheaded this effort to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the 2020 election. So with that in mind, moving forward to 2024, where Donald Trump is likely to be the presumptive Republican nominee despite the indictments he's facing, does it concern you at all having a Speaker of the House who's made statements like he has about elections and sort of the timing of that with a general election, and how that might affect the our democracy and the efforts to cast doubt on the legitimacy of that future election?
Yes. My dashboard light is flashing red. This is a huge problem, and who is going to be Speaker in January of 2025 may determine whether we have a fair certification of the results of the 2024 election. Think for just a moment, if Mike Johnson had been Speaker on January 6th, 2021, remember what happened that day. I think everybody remembers the insurrection, but then we as members of Congress went back to the floor that evening and finished the job and certified the results. Would Mike Johnson do the same or not? And so the stakes have already been very high. The issues are so important, whether it's reproductive rights or gun violence or the environment or the LGBTQ community. It's all on the line. Social Security, Medicare, you name it, and just how we grow the economy in general. As I said, he does have the economic policies of Paul Ryan, maybe even to the right of Paul Ryan. But our democracy hangs in the balance here. And I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I worry about it every day.
Absolutely. In the closing minutes, Thad, do you have any final questions for Congressman Levin?
Yeah, any good news coming out of Washington, D.C.?
It's been so dark.
Things in your district.
So dark. Well, I'll have to come back and do the show again, and we'll talk about only good stuff. But I am very encouraged by what we've been able to do on spent nuclear fuel across the United States. We obviously have a challenge in our region with San Onofre and getting the waste off the coast, partnering with the Department of Energy, getting them almost $100 million in funding to restart a consent-based siting process. I've been very proud to be a partner of the DOE and Secretary Granholm, and I think we're in much better shape as a result of the working relationship that we've built. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, but we're making really solid progress on that. I'm also quite encouraged by the opportunity to use the funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law to really help our region. And I'm working very hard with our mayors and our local leaders to try to identify those projects that are the best fit. But already we've had over $100 million worth of infrastructure law money come to our district, and I'm expecting hundreds of millions more, particularly for things like our rail corridor. I've also been really proud to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to get sand on our beach. And it's very hard to have a beach town without any beach. And we really rely on, making sure that the Army Corps prioritizes our region for a whole host of reasons. But I've been really proud to actually now see some of the fruit of that labor. So, day in and day out, I'm so proud of my team. It takes a great team of people. And a lot of what we do is behind the scenes. You don't really read about it or hear about it on TV or, even in the UT or anything like that. But my team is awesome. And the casework they do each and every day, trying to get veterans their benefits, trying to make sure that, to the extent people need issues with the IRS or with anything else, they do amazing work. And my hat's off to them. Because again, I think the media likes to cover the most polarizing, divisive, controversial stuff. They don't want to talk about us working together. They never want to ask about any of the bipartisan work we've done, whether for veterans or for the environment. They want to focus on whatever is most divisive. If I go out the front steps of the Capitol right now, inevitably there'll be one or more reporters there who would love nothing more than for us to tear each other to shreds because it's good for their business model. And I worry a lot about that. I worry about the proliferation of social media as the main source. And, maybe Thad, you can poll your students on where they get their news. If their first place is X or God help us, TikTok or something like that, then, we're all in real trouble. So I hope that, we can do our job and encourage people to get more diverse media diets. How about that? But it's just an honor to get to continue to serve it. It's just a great, great community. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to do in the last 4.5 years and look forward to a lot more in years to come.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Congressman. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have to go in a minute. So I really appreciate you joining us today. And I just want to say, thank you for all the work that you're doing for our district. I know it's not an easy job up there, so we appreciate you. And let's make it a round two at some point for you to come on the show and dive into some of these topics a little more. So
I look forward to it. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you. And Thad, it's always good to see you, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman. And
take care, guys.
Thank you to your staff as well. Yeah, absolutely. You too.
Bye-bye.
You as well. Bye-bye. Hey, Stay Classy listeners, Steve here, and we have a new friend of the show I can't wait to share with you. None other than Legendary Group, San Diego's premier nightlife company that specializes in making your nights unforgettable. If you haven't heard already, they are the go-to source for connecting you to the best events in the city and handling all of your VIP needs. The To access the very best of San Diego, visit www.legendarygroup.com. That's www.lgndrygroup.com for more information. So we're going to do something a little different today. We had the congressman for only about 20, 25 minutes. So to fill the rest of the show, we wanted to bring on some constituents, actually, people who actually live in Levin's district, and talk a little bit more about the issues, the gun violence issue, the fight over the speakership, the shutdown, et cetera, and sort of get that layman perspective, as it were. And so with that, I decided to bring on my own production manager, Rob Esposito. Rob has been with us since we started this show, and we appreciate all you do. But just tell us a little bit about, in terms of what you just heard from the congressman, sort of what struck you, maybe what you concurred with, what you dissented with, and sort of your overall take on his approach to the issues.
So like you mentioned, there wasn't a lot of time for him to really dig deep into some of those issues. So it was interesting to hear what he had to say about the speakership, and I've been watching that circus go on for 3-4 weeks now.
Long time.
I don't know if it was quite the Republican Civil War that some of the media was kind of branding it, but it sure does seem like they couldn't get their act together for the longest time, and then what do? They pick the most MAGA guy that they can find. And I thought the thing that was the biggest standout for me was when the congressman said, well, hey, they tried basically to steal an election in 2020, and then they almost got away with it. I mean, they got pretty darn close.
Yeah, a little too close.
And the new speaker is someone that signed on to all that, wrote amicus briefs, and it scares me because somebody, I don't remember where I was watching the coverage on him, said, oh, he's a constitutional scholar that also basically, tried to overthrow the Constitution.
Tried to throw out the Constitution altogether.
Right, absolutely. And so that's a little scary, know. And so, but the real takeaway, I think, was that Mike Levin said, hey, like they tried to do it, they almost got away with it, and they're putting someone in a place that is likely to help spearhead an effort to do it again. And I hate sore losers. So
me too. No losers here at Stay Classy.
None whatsoever.
I'm curious to know, like, as far as the gun violence stuff. I mean, I could have been hearing it wrong, but more or less the surmise of what I got from Levin and Professor Thad Kousser was that we're in a tough spot right now, really, because of the current constitution of the House, majority Republican House, and because of the filibuster in the Senate, the chance of meaningful legislation at gun reform to actually change laws to, ban assault weapons, or whether it's to expand background checks, expand red flag laws, that a lot of these common sense proposals that the majority of Americans support just really don't have a lot of a shot right now at actually advancing through Congress. Was that the sense you got? Was it sort of almost a hopelessness from the congressman?
It was a hopelessness, and I thought that, he tied it back to campaign finance reform and, gun lobbying and Citizens United. And I have to agree with him 100% on that. Let me first say that I am a gun owner. I own 3 guns. I really do enjoy shooting as a hobby. I don't keep my guns loaded in the house. I don't. I've read the statistics that if you own and keep a loaded gun in the house, you're much more likely to end up having your family get hurt or a child or something than actually saving yourself from a robber. It's just stuff.
Yeah, statistically happens most in the home.
If they want to come in my house and steal my cameras and things, like they're insured. It's not worth taking a life or risking my family or something in order to. But now all that said, I'm a gun enthusiast. I have guns. I like guns. I like going out shooting. We've got all these mountains and BLM land and stuff out here in Southern California you can drive out to and have a great time out in the desert or something. But all that said, tomorrow, if they said like, hey, there's going to be an assault weapons ban and we're not going to have any more assault weapons, I would be fine with that. I don't need an assault weapon. There's no reason. It would be cool to have an AR-15. I think they're really neat. I don't need
not necessary for an average person to own necessarily, unless you're, police or law enforcement or military or something along those lines. Yeah.
Right. And it's, I mean, when we have these mass shootings, like basically every other week, and it's a lot of time it's kids getting killed, or just random people in a grocery store. I think it was a bowling alley this last time, and it's
bowling alley in a grocery store. Yep.
But I do understand 100% and agree that, the lobbies in DC more or less control everything. And if you want to, get to the root of any issue, you just, like they say, you follow the money, right?
Yeah.
And
that's what the money is right now.
That's where the money is. And, the Republicans, on top of that, they also have a more rural constituency. A lot of red states are very pro-gun. Because of kind of the where they are in the population, and again, being very rural. So, I agree with the congressman 100%. Unless there is campaign finance reform, this stuff isn't going to change. And, I hate when any kind of gun law reform gets painted as, they're going to come take all your guns. Nobody is coming for your guns.
No.
Not even in California where we live, which has a reputation for being a very anti-gun place. Nobody is coming to take your guns.
Nope.
Do they want you to lock them up so kids don't get to them? Yes. Do they, is there's some laws about how many bullets you can have in your magazine? Sure, because nobody needs a 50-round clip.
Yeah.
You just don't.
Well, we're still getting information about this most recent shooter, but early reports seem to indicate that, surprise, surprise, he was mentally disturbed, was hearing voices in his head and all that. And I think that the congressman said himself, like something like 80% or maybe even more percent of Americans support some kind of background check system where mentally ill people like that, people with a track record of documented mental illness, whether it's schizophrenia or schizoaffective, bipolar, et cetera, where those people, we somewhat limit their access to firearms, and especially to heavy duty firearms like AR-15s. And that to me is the most shocking part. That seems like so common sense, and so like, why wouldn't you, not want a crazy person to own a gun? And I just don't understand how we haven't gotten to that point. But as you said, it's the money, it's following the money. And
it often is. And it's really crazy because whether it's true or not, every time, one of these things happens, both sides, Republicans, Democrats, and let's put the third side in, the gun lobby, everybody comes out, it's mental illness. It's not the guns.
Yeah.
They just
write it off.
Yeah. It's just crazy people. And so, okay, great. All right, well, let's take the guns away from the crazy people, or not let crazy people get more guns, however you want to look at that.
And then they say no to that.
And then, absolutely not. So how can you say, well, use that as a scapegoat and say, it's just the crazy people, the guns are fine, and then not do anything about it? It's they're just paying lip service.
Thoughts and prayers.
Truckloads of thoughts and prayers aren't going to bring back any of those 20 or whatever many people were shot in Maine.
Yeah. And you keep thinking like, this is going to be like the tragedy that sort of sparks reform. This is going to be the one that sort of changes people's minds, even those at the high levels of office, even, the most intransient of Republicans. You think like, but, Sandy Hook, or what was the one in Texas? Uvalde, which was very graphically documented in a disturbing way. And but it's necessary, right? Like we have to start showing people, unfortunately, what this is, because unfortunately, Americans are very stubborn people, and we tend to change our minds when presented with, images. That's how the civil rights movement sort of took off in the 60s and 70s with, images of protesters being, beaten up, et cetera. And it seems to be that our national conscience is captured most by the imagery. But where I was going with that was saying, you keep thinking it's going to be a certain tragedy or at a certain scale that's going to actually change people's minds. But I'm personally sort of losing hope that that's going to happen, because it seems like it would have happened by now.
You're not wrong. I mean, like, how many middle school kids have to be murdered for people to change their minds? And apparently there is no number. Like, it's just infinite.
Like, again, hot mic moment, but do we have to splatter blood all over Congress? Like, what's it going to take? Like,
well, that already happened. And
really?
That was Steve Scalise got shot. They were.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. What was that? Maybe. I mean, this is going back a few years. This was maybe like 2016 or 17 or something like that. But there was that congressional softball game, and it might have been like when Trump was running, or right after he got elected. It was somewhere in that range. And there was a guy he was a liberal guy, a Democrat that was thought that these guys, rightly so, we found out later, were, basically bad for democracy. And he thought they were, basically trying to ruin the country. And so he went on a shooting spree, at the softball field where the congressmen were having their softball. Not the right way to go about things, clearly. But, we've got Republican members of Congress taking bullets. Literally taking bullets in their body.
Taking bullets for the NRA.
For the NRA. No kidding. I mean, I think that in a nutshell right there.
That sums it up. Well, how about this? How about we keep this going? Daniela, do you want to hop in? Yeah. We're going to bring on, Rob, thanks.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, great.
But we want even more diversity perspective as we continue to go over some of these issues. Now, one thing that the congressman mentioned during the interview was actually, sort of his reservations over the way that people get information, sort of how, people dissect information, the sort of combativeness, the partisanship that we see in the media, and sort of the tearing people down, the, using the media essentially as a weapon to inflame partisanship and that sort of thing. And he was specifically worried about how people get their information. He talked about, where people get their media sources from, especially people, Danielle and I's age, people who are in the Gen Xers, Gen Zers, and millennials. I get them confused, but, generally people are younger in their 20s, that sort of thing, where we sort of get information as the next generation that's going to be in power. So, Danielle, I wanted to ask you, first of all, what did you think of what the congressman said in terms of his concern about how young people get information and how they sort of filter out, credible, verifiable information from the garbage, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's for sure an issue. As a college student, I observe also a lot of the ways that people get their news. And I think that it's the statistic is 71% of people get news from social media. So TikTok, YouTube Shorts, anything like that. And then very small percentage of those people are actually interested in knowing wanting to know what's going on in the news. So it's a pretty crazy statistic. Even talking with people at school, it's no one is interested in it.
Yeah. You're at UCSD, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to know is do you think that most people your age, or especially I guess people that your age, have that critical thinking ability to sort of distinguish credible, verifiable, fact-checked informational sources versus just something that was on the internet? Or do you think that that's a skill that's sorely lacking in our generation?
It's sorely lacking, and I think a large part of that is because of attention spans now. With TikTok and YouTube, you can only get people's attention for about a minute. You have 60 seconds to say what you need to say, and the person will scroll in the next 30. So that's definitely an issue, because now it's I don't think people are second guessing. I would say I have a couple friends where they're okay, no, let's we talked about NPR earlier. I have a couple friends who listen to NPR and will actually listen to credible news sources, but majority of people, it's even in classes, they'll bring up something they heard from TikTok. And it's super interesting to kind of kind of see that happen. Yeah.
So, I mean, and the problem is it's not, you might be listening to this and be whatever, people get information from lots of places. But the problem is that this informs people's voting choices. It informs their life decisions. It informs ultimately the policies that govern our country and affect our rights, our future as a nation. And so, for instance, we were talking about the issue of gun violence. And, when people are not informed about the realities of gun violence, about the realities of the statistics behind the fact that, America has a gun problem that is incomparable with any other Western democracy. When you're not informed and researched on these kinds of facts, you come to the table and you hear something that you saw on social media, you're going to make a poorly informed decision, whether that's who you're voting for, whether that's what policy you're voting for, or whether it's just a life choice. So I think that it's not just limited to, people get information from a lot of places, but it's also that this actually has real everyday effects on our lives, as Americans.
For sure. Yeah, of course. I think even discussing how I said with classmates, you can see this and the way it affects students so much, even within discussion. I feel of course, I think there are people in the media who are sharing things in an unbiased way because they are concerned about the lack of there being actual real news on social media. So I think some like creators or platforms are doing it correctly, but that's very, very few from everything
Few
that's
and far between.
yeah, very, very few from everything else that's on there. So it is for sure an issue and a problem we should be worried about.
And another issue that we didn't even get to because of time constraints with the interview with Congressman Levin was the issue of immigration, which we talked about last week with Bill Wells, who's running for Congress, Mayor of El Cajon. So Bill Wells made a variety of claims about immigration. You know, he made claims about, you know, the number of people who have immigrated to the country under the Biden administration. And then he was talking about, you know, the percentage of immigrants who are criminals, which there was sort of a dispute that we had on air actually about, you know, what is the percentage of immigrants who actually have, you know, committed crimes versus American citizens. The statistic we pulled found that American citizens are more likely to commit crimes than undocumented immigrants. But the point is that it's important where you get your facts from because that affects real people. You know, that affects like these people who are coming into America. That affects like the way they live their lives, their quality of life. You know, it can be a life or death thing for a lot of people. I don't know. Do you have any further thoughts on sort of the immigration front as far as like the importance of knowing your facts and checking your sources?
Yeah, because I think for sure for those people, the people that they're interacting with and running into as they migrate here is like those people, we don't know where they're getting their news from or their sources from. My sister, she's like a therapist for like underage children who come across the border just by themselves. And like she'll tell me like a lot of like her coworkers have certain assumptions made about them already before even entering, which is really interesting for being therapists. But yeah, I think it for sure matters because thinking about like those children also and how many people they interact with over the course of getting here, finding a family, finding a foster home, all these people, they don't know where they're getting their news from or even what side they're on and how that will skew and affect the way that they interact with children. So I think it's for sure important and an issue that we need to be further looking at.
Yeah. What do you think is like, and not to put it all on you, but sort of like, what do you think is like kind of the answer to like the just wasteland of information out there in terms of you have so much information on social media now, people don't know what to believe. And a lot of people, unfortunately, just, you know, the reality is a lot of people lack those critical thinking skills to disseminate, you know, to make that distinction between what's verifiable and what's not. What do you think that like an everyday person can do just sort of push back against the narrative of misinformation that's flooding our content channels?
I think for people of our age, it's for sure a problem because how I said like I think our attention spans are so short. But I think first of all, our generation needs to like care to want to know about the news because a majority of them I feel like don't, and it's honestly because it's such a messy space. So many opinions and people are saying so many things. So I feel like a lot of people are intimidated to kind of even like learn more. But I think first, I would say like there's even podcasts that are doing like 15-minute news, like NPR, for example, does like a 15-minute news run every day. And for like college students like myself, like I can listen to that on my way to class and kind of get informed on that day. So I think for things like that, it's like maybe if we don't have the time to fully read up on all the information, even taking up a couple minutes of our day or listening to it on our car rides would be like super helpful enough. Yeah. And then also knowing and trusting that not everything that you see on the internet is going to be accurate. Really looking further into beyond just scrolling. It would be super helpful for people. Yeah,
super practical everyday steps, actionable items that we can all take. Just, you know, being a little more careful about what we say, what information we retweet or repost or whatever. Actually, you know, doing some research. So there's little things we can all do to push back against this narrative because it is a problem, right? It is a problem that we live in a time where, you know, people believe that, you know, the elections are stolen, that everything's rigged, that, you know, all sorts of conspiracy theories, you know, 9/11 was an inside job, all sorts of stuff that, you know, just information out there that isn't verifiable, but it's fun to say, it's fun to spread around, and I just think that our generation needs to take initiative on that front. We need to seize the day. We need to actually seize control of our own minds and of the ways that we disseminate information, the way we spread information, do our part. So, thanks again, Danielle, for coming on the show today.
Yeah,
from all of us at Stay Classy, thank you so much. This has been another recorded episode. I think we're on 52 now. And thanks to everybody for putting up with my bronchitis and my coughing. But we love you all, and tune in for next time. Yeah, that's a wrap.
This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsor, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com. Check us out at stayclassysdpod.com or any of our social media outlets. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere else you get your podcast content. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us continue bringing you important content that you're not going to see anywhere else. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.